Buddy Roemer was inaugurated governor in March of 1988. President Reagan was in his 8th year in office. Harold Swear was president of CABL, and David Conroy was its chairman. Governor Buddy Roemer. Mike Foster was inaugurated as governor on January 8, 1996, with Bill Clinton in the middle of his presidency. Justin Bieber was less than 2 years old. Harold Swear was president of CABL. Chris Kinsey was chairman. Governor Mike Foster. And finally, Governor Kathleen Blanco was inaugurated as Louisiana's first woman governor on January 12, 2004, with George W. Bush, history in the making, serving as president. Later that month, Hamid Karzai would sign Afghanistan's new constitution into effect. Katrina and Rita were just names. Barry Irwin was president of CABL. Charles Landry was its chairman. Kathleen Blanco. So with that as perspective, let's jump into this. Each of you at different times faced very real crises as governors. We all know that there's nothing like serving at the level you served to change you, to bring you new experiences, to teach you new lessons. Pick one of your crises and talk about the personal impact of that and how it changed you while you were in office. What lessons did you learn? Governor Edwards.
My crisis came after I was governor. We all had events that occurred during our terms that we had to address. And no matter how good or effective we are, none of us will ever serve and have our successes without any problems, because society changes, circumstances changes, opportunities change, and we just have to serve and address problems as they occur. I had a number of hurricanes that hit during my term, unfortunately not nearly as devastating as the one that hit while Kathleen was governor, and we did what we could to address it and to relieve people from the burdens of being subject to hurricanes. But the problems that I had dealt in the early 70s with the oil and gas conditions in the country. It's amazing, but people of today now still parroting the same things that I was saying in 1971, 72 about what we needed to do to become energy independent. Same thing, drill offshore, explore on our natural resources in this country, build more pipelines, build more refineries, change the method by which we collect taxes on oil and gas, build opportunities to use alternate forms of energy, wind, sun, solar, even by harnessing the power of the tides. But although there's been much talk about it, nothing really has been done in all these years that have intervened. I guess if we could just bottle all the hot air that have come from all the politicians all these years about what we ought to do, we'd have enough energy to run the country. When I said in 1972 that the price of oil would someday go to $100 a barrel, people thought I was crazy. Well, it's averaged $86 a barrel for the past decade, and it's been over $100 several times. My problem is this. When we, in this state, the governor is the central focus of power. Good, bad, or indifferent, weak or strong, it all starts and ends with the governor. And if you don't believe that, you look at the present governor. I mean, it doesn't matter what is proposed unless the governor gets behind it It really isn't going to happen. Our first problem was the Constitution, which we managed to get done over the objections of many people. Let me just simply say that made it possible for us to compress the state government out of 260 state agencies into 20 departments, which have served us well. It allowed us to change the method by which we elect our officials. We are the only state in the country that has an open election system. Some have cross primaries, some have open primaries, but ours is an open election system. It is the only one like it. And although there's been some criticism about it a number of times, people are trying to change it, but it never happened because it was good. Bottom line is, I was very controversial. I know none of you have ever heard anything bad about me, but people in the old days used to talk bad about me. But I survived, and what I said was going to happen, happened. And as you sit here, and I'm going to close on this, in spite of all that's been said about me, you are the legatees and owners of a special fund for education in the bank, now worth $1.2 billion. No other state has anything like it. Alaska has a fund, and on a per capita basis, is larger than ours, but on a net basis is much smaller. I know that things have changed. These governors had to address their problems as they came. They were all different. But at least in this state, we had a very alert press that kept people aware of what was going on and gave them an opportunity to make changes if they thought it was necessary. I'm here today because I was been invited to come, and I'm very proud of the fact that in a small way I have impacted the affairs of this state through the 45 years that I've served in all levels of government. Having said that, I'll now turn it over to you, sir, and I'll answer whatever questions you want. And just like I told the grand jury, what the hell you want to know, and I'll tell you.
Thank you, Governor. For this first question, we're going to go in chronological order, and then we're going to abandon any pretense of order for the remainder of the session. So, Governor Roemer.
The question was a crisis, and my memory of it. The crisis that I faced that was almost overwhelming was the financial condition of our citizens and our state. It's not a person's fault. It was a combination of oil and gas collapse, primacy on one industry rather than diversity, an education system that had worked at best mediocre. Louisiana was vulnerable. When I was sworn in, the unemployment rate was 13.8%. The budget had not been truly balanced in 7 years. Our bond rating was the lowest of any state in America and lower than Guam. Our school teachers were paid 50th in America, the worst. People had to leave the state to find a job. There was no hope, and the truth did not come from where we expected it. And it was almost overwhelming. In fact, Edwin Edwards did me the greatest favor. I went to see him the week after that election. He invited me to the mansion, and we sat and talked for a while about how bad the situation was. And he said, "Buddy, it's worse than you said in the campaign." I never will forget it. He said, "You thought we had a deficit of 100 to 200 billion. He said, "It's 2 or 3 times that." And he did me a favor. He let me appoint the Commissioner of Administration the next day. That was on the 1st of November. I didn't take office until March 15th the next year. But for 5 months, we ran the government. We cut $238 million from spending, and we weren't even the governor. Edwards let me do that, and I appreciated it. When the state needed it done. And I know a lot of politicians said, "Well, buddy, you got blamed for every cut, and you weren't even governor yet." But who cares? It's not about politics. It's about saving a state, and this state was at the threshold of collapse. There was no hope. There was no plan. There was no future. Now, the day I was elected, 25 years ago last month, I was 6'2", had light brown hair, and smiled a lot. And I didn't know I was going to be the bankruptcy governor. I didn't expect that. I didn't want that. I didn't know that. But there I was. And I guess, Jim, the thing that I'm most proud of is that we survived. We gave hope. We gave teachers a 30% pay raise and said we would test them to find out who could teach. I know the unions fought me every step of the way, but it's the right thing. Isn't it funny to watch the same battle 25 years later? We balanced the budget. We raised the bond ratings 3 times in the next 4 years. No state in America did that. We cleaned it up as best we could. And that's my strongest memory. I would go home at night, and I've never said this publicly before, and I would sit on the edge of my bed crying after another 17-hour day. I mean, I ran for re-election and wish I could have beaten Edwin Edwards and David Duke, but when I didn't, I got back in that same bedroom and smiled and said, "Thank you, Lord." Being governor, let me tell you something. Being governor's tough at any time. But when you're facing collapse, when people hang on to you crying about their job, it was awesome. Thanks.
Thanks, Governor. Governor Foster.
Well, let's see. Where did I start? Buddy said something that I want to start with, but it doesn't have anything to do with major problems that we faced, that I faced while I was serving my time at this office. But Edwin must have done favors for a lot of governors, because I never will forget, right after I got elected, my commissioner of administration came running up to me and said, "Boy, I just found some money that I could save." And I said, "Well, what's that, Mark?" He said, "Edwin ordered this helicopter, brand new one, and I can cancel it." I says, "Mark, if you do, you're finished." Every helicopter the state had was at least 30 years old, so Edwin, I never really got to thank you for that, but I enjoyed it. Now, if I'm going to stick with crises, the one that sticks in my mind really never got dramatic, but it was dramatic to me because I was right in the middle of it. It's going to happen again, and it sort of happened this year a little bit. And that was about midway through my term, I began to realize, and everybody that worked for me began to realize, the Mississippi River was coming up and up and up. And in those days, we didn't have all these fancy departments to deal with crisis. Anytime I had a crisis that was something like that, I had the head of state police, the head of the National Guard, and a couple of others, and we made the decisions. But the river came very, very close to overflowing its banks. And I've thought since about other things that could have happened. If that ever happens, it's going to make Katrina look like a Sunday school picnic. It's going to make half the state will flood. Half the state will flood. And where I live, down in St. Mary Parish, we have a 30-something foot levee right 2 miles behind the house. That's the Chapel Basin. And if that breaks, we're going to have, the water will look like it did. What was the year that it flooded? 27. It'll look like that. And I was so afraid. I'm glad that we didn't have the terrorists running around that we have today. But I was so afraid that somebody would make a mistake. And we did all kinds of stuff. We stopped a lot of the transportation in the Mississippi River. We stopped chemicals moving in the river. We insisted the industry put tugs up north of the bridges to help the boats downriver, because boats literally have almost no steerage in a river that's really moving. And I think the high point of this emergency, which of course never happened, was one night at the mansion. I get this call about 2 in the morning. It was Burl Cain. And Burl said, "Governor, we're evacuating. We're leaving Angola." And I'd already suspected it could happen. It would have cost the state $1 billion to evacuate, rebuild it. And I never will forget. I said, Burl, do me a favor. Try one more time, would you, and call me in the morning. He said, okay. And he did, and he tried one more time, and they succeeded, and we did not lose Angola. A year after that, I asked the head guy, General Landreneau with the National Guard, to go up there and fix the levee. The part of the levee that protects Angola has never been taken in, had never been taken into the national levee system. And what was happening, these sand boils would just come up. But at any rate, so we did fix it. And this last time, they had a lot better chance of surviving. But that was probably the thing that scared me the most. And like I say, it didn't get exciting to the public because it never happened. But it's always there, and we have to be very conscious of it. And I'll give you a piece of advice, because obviously this piece of advice did not get up to our friends in New York who had the big storm. Buy flood insurance. Don't think because you live in Baton Rouge you can't flood. It can. Half the state could flood. So if you have a house, flood insurance is cheap, and it pays off, believe me, because I've been through 2 hurricanes with a camp or 2 in which they just got wiped out, and they will pay. But that was probably the most stressful time I had for a period of time. And like I say, my advice to you is, if you don't have it, buy flood insurance, even if you don't think you live where you might get flooded.
Thanks, Governor. Governor Blanco.
Well, after listening to my 3 former governors, I would have to just say that I think that they had amateur crises. When I ran for office, I had been a student of Louisiana and its problems for a long time, because I started in the legislature and served on the Public Service Commission and then lieutenant governor, so I was keenly aware of the problems that we were dealing with poverty. Poverty I knew could be cured with good-paying jobs, and good-paying jobs could only be acquired by people who were properly educated. So I knew what my focus was going to be. It was going to be in that area. When I campaigned on literally on rebuilding Louisiana and on trying to connect North and South Louisiana people together in a more profound way. And those are the things that I thought I was doing. And a few months into my term, I realized that God took that literally, rebuilding Louisiana and connecting people in North and South Louisiana. 2 hurricanes came within less than a month's time, not just run-of-the-mill hurricanes that we were all very familiar with, but 2 of the most powerful and destructive hurricanes in the country's history. So after Katrina and Rita left 300,000 homes either heavily damaged or totally destroyed, left 81,000 businesses shuttered, and just destroyed schools and public properties all over coastal Louisiana. I knew that I had a new direction that I had to work in. But at the same time, I never forgot those 3 key things that I wanted to do something about. So I would have to say that to see our people so terribly wounded was one of the most painful things that I had to endure. I never faulted a single Louisiana citizen who cried out for help. But I did find that the national politics of disaster were very distasteful. Excuse me. It soon became one of those political hayrides that had its own rhythms and its own energy, I guess I'd say. When you find the presidency having to defend itself against attacks for not coming into our situation on time. And then the political operatives within that organization trying to turn the blame on the leaders in Louisiana. You know that you're playing politics at its highest level. So I understood what was going on. And my staff wanted me to strike out and begin to attack back. And I told them that we didn't have the time or the energy to do that. This was no time when we were trying to save lives to try to do a public relations campaign, that we were going to focus our energies, our entire beings, our mindset was going to be focused on the job at hand. And in doing that, I look back today and tell you that we built a very strong foundation for recovery. There were days when desperate people never believed that they could recover from such devastation. But so many of the things that I set in motion in those early days were so very controversial. It didn't really matter what we announced that we were going to do. There were critics out there saying it was the wrong priority. We had to do a lot of things. I saw the New Orleans education system totally destroyed, physically destroyed. The school buildings were destroyed, and the kids were not there because the families were dispersed all across the countryside. I saw families on television one day when I walked into the office and the TV was on, and I saw families enrolling their children in schools in North Louisiana, families from South Louisiana, enrolling their children in schools in North Louisiana and over in Southwest Louisiana and Central Louisiana, as well as in Texas and Arkansas and places far beyond. And I told my staff at that moment, I said, these folks in New Orleans never knew what a real school was supposed to function like, and now they're getting a taste of it. And when they come home, they're going to want better schools. So we're going to take an advantage and create that opportunity for them. And that is why we have the, excuse me, that's why we have charter schools and recovery schools, the Recovery School District. We'd actually set that in motion the year before, the ability to take over a school for failing academically. We never dreamed a year before that we would take over more than 100 and something like 108, 110, or 20 schools. But there it was. It was as much of an opportunity as a desperate cry for help. And so we did that. I think today we see a much stronger school system in the New Orleans area. We knew that levees had to be repaired and strengthened and that we needed flood control. And I had to go to Washington, which I ended up hating every minute of. I hated Washington. I hated the people because they were playing politics. Yeah, they were playing politics. They weren't thinking of Louisiana people as citizens of the United States. They were thinking of Louisiana as being, well, when the Republicans were in control, they were thinking of Louisiana as being controlled by a Democrat. And it was a lot less fun for the Republicans in control at that time to help me than to help my good neighbor and good friend, Haley Barbour. And so disparities in funding started happening, and I had to go to the White House and say, hey, this isn't going to happen. We are all people of this United States, and we're not going to have disadvantaged funding and not allowing our people to have the same opportunity for recovery as Mississippi people. An artificial boundary doesn't create a sense of unfairness. And President Bush came along with my request at that time and gave us an additional $4 billion because we had been underfunded in the first round. Then we needed, that money was for housing. He did commit to rebuilding the levees, and he didn't know how much he was committing for, but it was many billions more. We did building codes, universal building codes, a very controversial thing to inflict upon the people across the state of Louisiana. But it gives us the opportunity to build safer, smarter, and stronger, and those were our tenets for that recovery. So we took advantage of reorganizing governments. We took advantage of making our world a safer physical world. But when I look at what happened in New York and I see the people very upset, it feels exactly the same as what happened to our people. And those folks are going to learn that it takes a good while to get your physical world back up and running. But if you have the right thoughts about it, and if you have the right heart going into it, it can be done. And people have to be given the confidence that it can be done. And I think that even though I took a huge beating for deciding to rebuild the Superdome within about 6 weeks, I think, after the storm, and was certainly told that I had the wrong priorities, the day that the Saints played in the Superdome, the following September, 1 year later, was the most exciting time, the most excitement I had ever seen in the city of New Orleans. It was electrifying to be there in the city. And it was more than a football game. The reason that I ordered that to happen was because that building had become the symbol of despair. It was the symbol of everything bad that happened when the roof ripped open and left our people vulnerable, when all the water and sewage systems went down, and it was a nasty environment. And if we had not brought that particular building back up, it would have been a much harder task for the folks who lived in the affected area to keep their shoulders to the grindstone, because they were working day and night in a sense of despair, with a sense of hopelessness. And that energizing moment brought them over the psychological barriers of being able to feel confident that if we could bring that big building up, and it was a Herculean effort. Doug Thornton led a team of peoples, architects and engineers, who had to have everything working right on time. And by the way, if we had not been able to get that building ready in time for that game, Tom Benson was going to move the Saints to Texas, and it would have been the San Antonio Saints and not the New Orleans Saints. And we would have lost so much of our spirit and our energy that I had identified with that team. So it became also now the symbol of victory. And I think that, I knew that from day one. I didn't know how big a beating I was going to take for it. But I knew that it was going to be the symbol of victory, that we could overcome these really, really difficult things. And in the end, I got Congress to fork over some $29 billion. So we had lots of challenges all along the way. It made me tougher to know that I could go up against a president. There were times when I got money. When the Congress changed, I'm going to tell you this one little bit, and then I'm going to let others talk. When the Congress changed and the Democrats took control again, I was on my way back to Washington, and I told my staff, I'm so angry that I have to keep going back. We needed yet another $3 billion. And I just didn't know how I was going to get it. And, and they were cold and indifferent. Dennis Hastert had said that we should not rebuild New Orleans there. And, I had to demand an apology, a public apology from him. So it was that tone. And then I ran into one of my friends after I got to Washington, and Nancy Pelosi was in charge of the House. And I ran into one of my friends, And she said, well, how's it going? I think it was around Washington Mardi Gras time. And I said, well, I think I just died and came back Haley Barbour, because now I know how he was treated from the outset. And now they can't do enough for Louisiana. It's, what can we do for you, and how much can we give you? And I said, and you know that's wrong. It's wrong that it happened in the first place, that they didn't want to help us. And it's wrong that just because now, you know, there's a change of order, that they will do everything in their power to help us. I got that additional $3 billion from them. But I thought about how terrible national politics had gotten. And I don't admire that in the least. And I will do everything to fight it whenever I can. But those are some of the rough times, and that not only I went through, but over 1.5 million people suffered. And this was a really defining time for Louisiana. And I hope we never have to go through this again.
Thanks,
you.
Governor.
Do it again, Kathleen. One more time.
Thank you, Carter.
For this next question, whoever would like to jump in first, do so, and we'll let this flow more freely. We've alluded to the legislature at various times. I talked a little bit at the beginning about how different things were in 1972, how much they've changed over the course of time. Each of you have had very different legislative experiences, but we've gone from a time where you had a predominantly Democratic House to a predominantly Republican House, from a House where 60 Rayburn served for 44 years to a legislature where we have term limits. A lot of changes over the course of time. Talk a little bit about your own experiences and lessons, and then more importantly, what advice would you have, not for this governor, but for the next governor, about developing an approach to dealing with the legislature?
Yeah, and I'll be glad to start this one because I have a very strong opinion on it. You're talking about the interaction between the legislature and governors and future governors. I was either fortunate enough or unfortunate, but I was chairman of a governors association, Southern Governors Association. And I tell you how much some of my compadres that were governors in these states suffered. There would be a Republican governor in a state that had a Democratic legislature, or they'd be the vice versa. And they did everything except try to indict you. And I mean, they had miserable times. And I thought, you know, this is what's good about Louisiana. And I think it still exists. I began to see it change a little bit, which worries me. Louisiana has never been organized along the party lines. We always had committee chairmen that were both Republicans and Democrats. We had speakers of the House of one party and presidents of the Senate of other parties. And to me, it was one of the best things of our political system. And I think most of you will probably agree with that. And you see what's happening in D.C. That's the very worst thing that can happen to you, where everybody has to go to their caucus and ask how they vote. And that doesn't exist in Louisiana still, did not exist, and it is one of the better things, and I don't know whether you all would agree with me or not, but it's one of the better things of Louisiana politics that I hope we can keep.
Who else would like to talk about that, Governor?
Pardon me, I'm awfully hard of hearing. When I go to meetings, I have Trina come along to pass the information on to me. Everybody ought to have a hearing aid like Trina. When I prevailed upon the legislature to change the voter registration and the election laws, the Republicans were very upset about it. They thought that I was trying to decimate the Republican Party. And I met with them, all 6 of them, and I told them then, I said, you got it wrong. This is going to open the gates for people to register as Republicans, and those who wish to do so should be allowed to do so, rather than force them to remain registered as Democrats and have a Republican philosophy. And thanks to that change and to Ronald Reagan, whether you like him or don't like him, he was very much responsible for the resurgence of the Republican Party in the South, and the switch and the change and the movement in Louisiana and the South to conservatism, both financial and socially. Those things contributed to the swelling of the ranks of the Republican Party, which brought us to the situation that we have today. My view is simple. It doesn't matter. I don't think that it changes the philosophy or attitude of a person. I don't know a finer human being from a standpoint of politics than Mike Foster. And he's a Republican. And that doesn't mean he's a problem to me. I know what he means and what he's for. You know, I'm 85 years old. I was a registered Democrat all my life. I finally found a reason to like Republicans. I sleep with one. And what's significant, I think, in Louisiana, we like each other, we get along, we understand the problems, and we work together, Republicans and Democrats. That philosophy existed in Washington, where if the Republicans are for it, the Democrats are against it, and vice versa. You know, when I was in Congress, we worked together and got things done. When I was governor, I worked with the Republicans in the legislature, 7 of them. And I know that Kathleen did, and of course Mike worked very well with the Democrats, and so did Buddy Roemer, although he's been on both sides of the aisle and understands it. But the important thing to me is the attitude and the spirit of people who serve us in this state.
Right.
I'm going to be really honest. Governors love to control the legislature. And when you can do that, you can get your way in the legislature. I think you all know that. I don't think I'm saying anything that you don't realize. But I do think that the partisan part of it leaves a lot to be desired for the results for the people that you serve. I think that I call it government for dummies if you have 2 camps. And then, you know, and it's just a matter of numbers. Okay, I've got more than you've got. I can do whatever I want. Louisiana was more factional politics. And to govern Louisiana, all of these gentlemen, and still when I was governor, had to figure out who was in each faction because the factions changed based on the topics. And people who had an interest in the topics would gather together, whether for or against the topics. And then the real debates ensued. And so in the end, and politics always looks messy to outsiders, but when you get in it, you know, there's a good pull and tug, and the players really enjoy it. But once you get through with that process, the final product is closer to an ideal product than if someone from the top dictates it and says, this is the way it's going to be, and I've got my numbers and I can get it done. So allowing the debate, allowing the differences makes a huge difference in what you end up with and how well that serves the people of Louisiana. So I had good relationships with my legislature. I had been a legislator. Edwin served in the legislature, and Mike did too. I think Buddy served in Congress before he came to Louisiana, to the governorship. But we know how that give and take works. We understood because we had been a part of it. And we also know that people in the legislature do look to the governor for leadership on the big issues. And so it's a good thing. There was an effort during my term to change that partisan, to create that partisan divide. It never took root. It never took hard root. It may be closer to that now, but this is still Louisiana. You've got your, you've got Republicans now revolting and creating another little faction within a faction. So we want to be independent here. Our elections are independent because of what Governor Edwards did, and our people feel a sense of independence no matter what their registration is. And so I think that's a very healthy kind of government, actually, to work that way.
Thanks.
2 points I would make. based on my experience, which was I was elected a delegate to the Constitutional Convention, which we rewrote in 1973-74. Edwards saw it clearly when he was elected and asked Louisiana to do it. The people voted overwhelmingly to do it. I ran and was elected to that, and that was really my first time in government, and it was such a wonderful experience. And over time, I've come to two conclusions about how government works best. You need debate, and you need transparency, and you need the branches to be independent of each other. It's slower that way. As governor, I passed everything I proposed. Sometimes it took me 2 or 3 times, but I passed it. I appointed the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate, 2 good men, Jimmy Demos and Alan Barres. But there were good men there before I got there, appointed by the governor. I think it's a mistake. I think in the long run, Louisiana can be better. If the governor, the woman who's governor, or the man who's governor has her or his plans and proposes, and the legislature has their strength and courage and disposes, and the judiciary opines as to the constitutionality of their actions. I know it's frustrating, and I know I love the theory of government, but I'm telling you in practice, Louisiana is the last ranking state in the South in terms of its growth over the last 40 years. Check the record. Next lowest to us is Mississippi. We've grown 23% in terms of our population over the last 50 years. 23%. Less than 0.5% a year. Texas is 125%. It's grown from 9 million when we were 3 million. We're now at 4.5 million, and Texas is at 26 million. Look at North Carolina. Look at South Carolina. Look at Alabama. Look at Oklahoma. Look at Arkansas. We're not stupider as a people. We love our state, and we care for it. And I think this question gets right to the heart of who we are. I used every power I could as governor to try to save a state. I know Edwin did the same, and Kathleen did the same, and Mike did the same. I'm not fussing. I admire them. In many ways, they were a much better governor than I. They were skilled at it. But I see it clearly. When I addressed the legislature my first time, a joint session, there were 144 members, and 138 of them were Democrats. A one-party state is not free, does not have debate. It's called tyranny. So we're better off with 2 or more parties. We're better off with a tougher debate. We're better off, our freedoms are protected if we can do this in a transparent way. And in the long run, our kids are helped and companies thrive. So this is not just an idle question. I was lucky I passed everything I wanted to in the legislature, except one issue, Mike. Remember what it was? A single board for higher education.
Still can't do it, so don't feel bad about it.
A single board. I mean, look at North Carolina, folks. We are crazy. We've got 4 and 5 boards. We need to have one board. LSU needs to be the flagship, but it needs to be tied to every university. We can save money. We can focus. If we don't do K through 12, if we don't follow Mike Foster's lead with community college and Kathleen's lead with funding higher education and Edwards' lead, you know what Edwards gave us? The first state in the South that had a policy of integration. How powerful was Edwin Edwards? How much I loved him for that. What that said to a Methodist boy about what this state could be. We've got our work to do, though. I don't want this program to go without saying it. I love Louisiana, but we trail the South. Look at them. Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas. We trail everyone, even Mississippi. And you know whose fault that is? That's our fault. And we need to help a guy like Bobby Jindal, who has the courage on K through 12, who has the courage on teacher tenure, who has the courage to put the kids first. And we need to give him some courage on higher education. And we need to use natural gas as the fuel of the future. We can do this, but we can't do it with a governor so strong that the legislature can only say, yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. No, sir. No, ma'am. They need to stand up.
We started off with some challenges which are necessarily negative in context. What was your favorite thing about being governor? What really got you moving in the morning? What made you feel good about the choices that you'd made and what you wanted to do with your life? Not that.
The day my term ended. Let me tell you this. Nothing.
And yet you came back for more.
Nothing that I know of that gives you the high of being governor of this state. It's an opportunity to serve people, to get things done, and to see things change. And we have a very, very good system here. I'm very, very proud of it. And I can simply say that they're unlike a lot of people who've been in office and out of office. I still would like to be governor. And I'm very glad they won't let me run, because I'd have run this time and I'd be governor today. I want to, without boring anybody, I want to make this one statement. In 1971, when I ran, CABL and PAR issued a 30-point brochure on what needed to be done in Louisiana to make it a better state. I adopted that as part of my platform. When I ran for re-election in 75, PAR issued a statement, although they hadn't supported me on the Constitution, but they issued a statement saying that all of the recommendations that they had made and that I had adopted had either been accomplished or was in the process of happening. And that, in my opinion, best summarizes what I was able to accomplish with the legislature and with PAR and with CABL in those days. Investment of idle funds, a new constitution, reforming state government, compressing government, addressing the needs of the state from a standpoint of oil and gas revenue, and those kind of things. If anybody's really interested in knowing, I suggest you go back and pick up PAR's statement in 1975 about what was accomplished during my first 4 years as governor. And I'm very happy to say that when I ran for re-election, I managed to get re-elected, and basically because I had accomplished those things, not by myself, but with the legislature and with the support of the people.
Thanks, Governor. Governor Foster.
I can be real brief. What I miss the most, the helicopter. So I learned to fly when I was governor, and I went and bought one for myself, and that's how I got over here today. So that's what I missed, and that's what I did.
Governor Roemer?
I think Edwin said it best for me. The chance to help a state in ways that nobody else can. I mean, I remember running for office, and I had no chance to win. There were really good people running: Edwin Edwards, Jim Brown, Billy Tozan. I know I'm leaving people out, but there were 5 or 6 really good candidates running: congressmen, statewide elected officials, a seated governor. I had no chance to win. But after 7 debates, we got over 1 point. We can be better. We can actually keep our kids in Louisiana. We can actually not have to visit at Christmas somewhere else. We can do it in this state. I mean, I'm most proud of the fact that I have 3 kids, and they're here today. Caroline in New Orleans running the charter school effort. Chaz on the Bessie board, and working in a bank that we formed, creating jobs in Louisiana. And Dakota has started his own company in the soccer world with a couple of his LSU buddies, Go Athlete. I mean, I'm so proud that they're here. And the best thing, Jim, was that you felt every day, all day long, you were doing something for them, for your neighbors. And that's a powerful feeling. That makes it worthwhile. You have no free time. You have no time off. Every mistake is exemplified and exaggerated. But every now and then, some mayor comes up to you in a small town and said, "Buddy, you kept my town alive. Thanks."
Governor Blanco?
Well, I think it was the big wins that were so much fun. I remember when we got Union Tank Car to come into Louisiana, we almost lost them to Texas. And Texas can buy things better than anybody, you know. But Union Tank Car brought jobs to Alexandria, to central Louisiana, that pay on average $65,000 to $70,000. That's a big win for our people. And that's a kind of an exciting win, because I had those education and economic development priorities, bringing LSU and UL and all of our campuses, the Southern University system, the UL system, and the LSU system, up to peer funding for the first time in at least a quarter of a century. That was extraordinary. It's heartbreaking to see the meltdown, and I'll be very honest about that. It was amazing to be able to actually bring teacher pay to the Southern regional average, and to ask teachers to do more and to have more accountability, and to see Louisiana students scoring higher and higher. I think we brought the grade point average of the ACT scores up pretty dramatically during my tenure. It was, I can't remember exactly, but it was 19.1 to 19.4 to 20.1. It was a very dramatic escalation in student achievement. We haven't seen that since that time. Because I believe in teachers, and I believe that educators are the people who know how to do their jobs best, and if we give them the right kind of financial backing, they can do a lot. And it is impossible to do more with less. So I don't ascribe to that philosophy, because no companies really do more with less either. Nobody does. Families don't either. You do less with less. The storm blew in a lot of good things for a lot of people, including for my family. I mean, we have a daughter-in-law who came in to spend a week volunteering, and she is now living in Shreveport and married to my son, and they have a new 5-month-old baby. And so, you know, my children were important to me, and part of what you give up when you're a governor and you have a very intense situation like I experienced is that your family suffers along the way. I was thankful for the house, for the mansion, even though at times I felt like it was a prison for me personally. It was a house big enough to hold my entire family all together at the same time. So for that I was grateful, and we could bring them in. I have 2 daughters here today and a grandson, Zachary, who is very interested in politics at 10 years old, and history, and he likes lots of very adult things. He's little Raymond, we call him. But Zachary was only about 4 or 5 years old when I left office, 5. And he was crying in the car on the way out when my daughter was taking him home. And his 3-year-old brother looked at him. He said, "Enough, Zachary, mansion over."
Thanks, Governor. Those of us from Alexandria are also very happy that you won on Union Tank Car.
Oh, yeah.
We appreciate that every day.
I loved it.
We're down to just about time to wrap up. We're here on Council for a Better Louisiana's 50th anniversary. Governor Edwards referenced that work along with PAR back in the early 70s, and I remember that list, and I remember those accomplishments. It was truly a revolutionary time in terms of the number of things that got done in a short period. Talk a little bit about your relationship with CABL, or just share a story about Ed Stagg or Harold Swear or Barry Irwin, especially Barry Irwin, if you would share stories about him. Anything about CABL and your time as governor?
I think CABL and PAR both are so intrinsic into our mindset that we adopt their philosophy sometimes without even realizing where they come from, because they're trendsetters and they're looking at the big picture. And I think it's very important. And Harold Swear's a dear friend of mine, and he worked with his whole heart and soul, and Jim Brandt and Barry Irwin and all of the people, and Ed Steimel at PAR. You know, those are important for Louisiana, because we need a reflector. We need to have somebody looking in the mirror and saying, look, this is who we are, but this is who we can be.
Governor Foster?
Well, all the organizations are good and good for government because they give us some direction out of the political realm. The thing I enjoyed the most was not really a CABL story. It was more a PAR story. I had a friend who was very fond of always talking about what government should do. And when I got elected, I called him and I said, why don't you come on over and see if you can get some of these things done? And got Mark Drennan involved, who had run PAR for years, and as I recall it. And that was very enjoyable.
Great. Thanks.
I couldn't do it without CABL. I mean, I think of Barry and Stephanie and the team. Ed Stagg and I were very close, as y'all know. And when I'd fall down, he'd prop me up. That's very important. My experience, the best leader I ever worked with was a guy named Ronald Reagan. I was a conservative Democrat in the House of Representatives, and I organized a group called the Boll Weevils. These were 43 Democrats who voted with the president when we thought he was right, which was a lot of the time on budget, on taxes, on military defense, on opportunity in general. But I learned a lesson there, and CABL has always stood for this. They don't ask your party. They don't look for your color. They don't care how much money you have in your pocket. They put the mission first. They're mission-oriented. And I'm asking CABL to help us for the next 20 to 30 years to keep this a state of opportunity. We're on a fine line. We're wavering on a fine line. And as much as these were good governors, we haven't been enough. We need CABL.
Thanks, Governor. Governor Edwards.
Organizations like CABL and PAR and so-called good government groups serve a real need. They can look at problems, they can look at needs, they can look at what needs to be done, but they don't have the responsibility of getting it done. And that's important because those of us who have to get it done have to be more careful about what we recommend, about what needs to be done. I'll close by quoting to you the lines of a poem that I once knew. Bullfight critics, packed in rows, crowd the plaza full, but there's only one who really knows, and he's the guy that fights the bull. That's us.
He's over there somewhere.
Once again, thanks to our governors. Please give them a big round of applause. And we'll close on that note. Thanks to CABL, thanks to LPB.